This is breaking news from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa.
Roll, but thank you everyone for coming today, and again, silence your devices. If you wish to testify today, I'm going to ask you to please sign up at the table over on the side so we have your correct information, so when we go to transcribe the minutes, we have the name with the right person. When testifying, please make sure you state your first and last name. If you're with an organization, please state that, and also make sure that you turn on the microphone so that we can hear you. If you brought papers to share with people, you should have submitted them by yesterday at 1 o'clock, and you should have brought 10 copies to share to put on the side desk. All those copies also are available on Nellis. And we're going to take public comment at the end of the meeting, and I'll go over the details of how we're going to do public comment a little bit later. We're going to take public comment first out of Las Vegas just because they're going to lose video feed earlier than we may finish. You can submit your full comments in writing, and committee members may use their laptops as they'll be looking up stuff relevant to the hearing. So I hope that you'll give them a little dispensation. So without further ado, I think we'll go ahead and get going. Good afternoon and welcome to this joint hearing. Today we're going to have a presentation from the Clark County School District Police and Superintendent of Clark County, Dr. Jesus Jara. I'm grateful and appreciative of them for taking the time to be here today, and the stakeholders that have also joined us today, those traveling from Las Vegas and making the journey up to Carson City. Thank you so much. I want to start off by saying that we here in the legislature respect those who serve the citizens of Nevada. We acknowledge the personal sacrifices of our law enforcement officers make every day. Law enforcement personnel are subject to high-stress situations and challenging environments on a daily basis. Consequently, we have worked over the years to pass multiple pieces of legislation focused on improving training, extending heart and lung benefits, and increasing funding. Equally with those investments comes public demand for law enforcement to be committed to transparency, oversight, and community engagement, especially when it involves our children. We know that the Clark County School District shares this vision. We want to ensure that kids, teachers, support staff be safe in schools, and it is in the legislature's best interest to find ways to support the administration and staff and to promote safe school environments. As we explore ways to make this happen, we need full and complete understanding of what's working and what's not. Recently, an incident occurred at Durango High School involving several students and the Clark County School District Police. While we understand there's an ongoing investigation, we also understand our constituents have requested that we engage in meaningful and collaborative dialogue to understand policy, process, and data. Clark County School District Police insight and expertise is crucial to understanding the complex issues surrounding school safety and security. Today's conversation will serve this body as we consider measures to enhance student and campus safety. By working together, we can create a safe and supporting learning environment for all students where we can thrive and each have their full potential. We're going to share a short video with you, and then at the conclusion of that video, I would ask Clark County to go to the witness table, and we'll begin the presentation. Thank you.
Hey, man, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. You want next to him? Start walking. Hey, buddy. Come on. Hey, Zion, call my mom. Take my phone. Hey, yo. Hey, chill. Bro, you can't have him on the floor like that. Just go. Hey, back up. Back up. You can't have him on the floor like that, bro. Back up. Come to me again. What the f***? Hey, on my mama.
As I stated before, this is an ongoing investigation, and while we can see the incident that brought us all here, we are not going to ask questions about the incident specifically because it is an ongoing investigation, and I would ask everyone on the committee and when we get to public testimony to respect that. I would now invite the Dr. Jara and Chief Black Eye, and I see your people from the south are already there, and go ahead and begin your presentation when you're ready.
Superintendent Jara, for the record, Senator Lang, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to come and share the work that's been ongoing in our school district. And as I stated February 13th, in light of the recent incident near one of our schools, I have spoken with and I am directing Clark County School District Chief of Police Mike Blackeye to conduct and complete review of the department's use of force policy and protocols. The relationship between our police officers and students must be of mutual respect of the inherent dignity of every person and respect for the laws and policies that govern all of us. Because of our actions, the children of our community and their families must believe that they will be respected, treated with dignity, and safe while at our schools or interacting with our employees. Anything less is simply unacceptable. That was released February 13th. That was my statement, and that's all I've spoken to because that has been a police matter, and thank you, Senator, for your comments. It is an ongoing investigation. So I'll talk a little bit about, if I can, really share with you some of the work that's been ongoing since I arrived in the Clark County School District around the work to make sure that all children that look like me and all children of 304,000 that attend our schools are respected, are safe, and all our educators are safe for learning. Because if our employees aren't safe or feel safe, they can't teach. And if our kids don't feel safe, they can't learn, which is our number one priority. So thank you for giving us the opportunity. I do want to give some data and some facts around the work. I arrived June 19th of 2018, and immediately or within a month, and I know the school district had been working on prior to my arrival on a school justice partnership and bringing in all groups, different groups, to really look at and eliminate the school to prison pipeline. And that work is still ongoing, and really proud of the work that our police department has been involved. And I know that our new chief, who has been in the job for, I think, right before COVID or during COVID, has been a part of it with our police department. One of the notes that 81% reduction of cases or students submitted to the Juvenile Justice Department in 5 years, 81% decrease of kids from our police department referred to the juvenile justice. I think that is a tribute of the work that's been ongoing in really providing and supporting our young people from going into the school to prison pipeline. I really want to say, and I'll turn it over to our chief, who is the first in the history of Nevada as a Native American chief in the state. That is not because of who and where he's from, because of the quality of executive that I have leading that department. And we have a department that is also consists of 40% of minority in our police department. So I just wanted to let you know that the safety of our kids and our staff is of the most priority for not only for me and also for my Board of Trustees. So now I'll turn it over to the chief so he can go over some of the data from our police department. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, boss. Thank you. Here today to talk about some of our policies and training. If you can hand me that, I'll flip through it.
Click for you.
Do you want to click for me? You can
Chief,
click for me.
please identify yourself.
Oh, I'm Chief Mike Blackeye of the Clark County School District Police Department. In Las Vegas today to help me out with the presentation and also to answer questions, I have Captain Burgess, Lieutenant Zink, Lieutenant Hewitt, Sergeant Mayer, Officer Picone, and our police social worker, Lori Smith. Yeah, I can't read that. I don't have that one. Okay, so you better. That's not right. There we go. I got it. All right. So a little bit of overview of our policies, and then we'll go into the some of our policies that I felt answered the question or the general questions that were posed. Some incident data, basically our use of force numbers for the past 3 years, actually 4 years. We didn't count the 2020, 2021 school year because that was the COVID year. And then officer training, and then just some other things that I've heard there were possible questions, and I'll answer some of those in the closing comments. We'll start with our procedure manual. The Clark County School District Police Department utilizes a list of general orders to guide police officers in the performance of their duties. It was first instituted in around about 2005, I believe, and it was modeled after Henderson PD's policy manual. They were an accredited agency, and we modeled our policy after theirs. The general orders in that policy manual are living documents. I have a policy manager and an assistant who oversees and updates and completes all the revisions to those general orders on an ongoing basis. Our general orders are structured to be compliant with standards developed through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies. It's CALEA, and through the years we've entertained the thought of being an accredited agency. We've followed those standards, however, we haven't had the funding to actually accomplish that. The next slide is our general orders. So I put together a list of general orders that I felt helped answer the questions about student interactions or juvenile interactions. The first general order I'll be covering is handling juveniles. It's our main general order, describing as many of the interactions we could possibly have and describing how our officers should handle those interactions. The next one will be the school justice partnership, but also it's noted in handling juveniles, that general order, and it's a method to actually handle some of the incidents that we're required to respond to. Harbor referrals, just like the school justice partnership, is another alternative measure through handling juveniles. Then we'll handle arrest, or we'll talk about arrests, search and seizure, and then use of force policy. All right, the first, as I stated, General Order 420. It's our main general order which covers dealing with juvenile incidents. At the start, we define a child. We define the CHINs, or child in need of supervision, and also a delinquent child. We then discuss the confidentiality of all juvenile records, so our officers are aware of that. Then it goes into alternative remedies to detention and arrest. And we'll speak about that in depth with the School Justice Partnership and also the Harbor, and then again with our training, because we do that yearly. We then go into the actual detentions and arrests of juveniles. We cover a procedure for felony offenses. So that procedure deals with nonviolent felony offenses that juvenile justice has allowed us to issue a criminal citation in lieu of custodial arrest of a juvenile and transporting them to juvenile justice or juvenile booking. The juvenile traffic enforcement basically is giving the officers instruction that juveniles committing traffic violations are treated in the same manner that adult violators are treated. Status offenses, that's where a juvenile commits offense that if an adult committed that same offense would not be a crime. For instance, graffiti implement. That's why they're all locked up. You know, someone under 18 cannot purchase graffiti implements and also have them on their person. We talk about medical situations. If the reality is that there are situations in our schools where officers are called to respond to, and children are either injured or some medical condition that they're experiencing, and we give guidance to those types of situations for our officers to work with medical staff. Our officers are trained they receive medical training to respond to those types of situations. Interview and interrogation guidelines. So we understand that we're dealing with juveniles, obviously, so there are some guidelines to follow for our officers when dealing with a juvenile suspect, witness, or victim. It's our reality, obviously, that we are working with not just one person, but also three, and they're intimately involved in whatever we're doing with a child. Finally, in handling juveniles, General Order 420, we talk about safe voice and handle with care notifications. Our dispatch center is the main conduit through which safe voice notifications are routed throughout Clark County or Southern Nevada. So we'll route those to the appropriate jurisdiction if it's outside the Clark County School District jurisdiction. And that is handling juveniles. General Order 422, that covers the use of the School Justice Partnership. That was developed through an MOU with the Board of Trustees with the Clark County School District and Juvenile Justice in Las Vegas, Nevada. That MOU describes highly the use of officer discretion to apply alternative measures when juveniles commit low-level misdemeanor offenses. In the MOU that is available online on ccsd.net, they describe focus acts, and they lump in a group of misdemeanors, nonviolent misdemeanors, and term them as focus acts for officers to utilize their discretion to either provide mentoring or counseling, refer the incident to school administration. We have social workers on staff that can be referred to. There's counselors on staff that can be referred to. There's trial by peers. There's a number of different options the officers can utilize. The main option that the officers do utilize is the mentoring and counseling option for alternatives to a low-level nonviolent misdemeanor offense that's committed on school property. Last school year, the 2021-2022 school year, our officers reported 2,700 alternatives to arrest for low-level, nonviolent misdemeanor offenses for children in the Clark County School District. The year prior to that, we had 218, I believe. So it was a large jump from the inception of the program towards the first real year we put it into practice. Dr. Jara did talk about the information of 81% decrease in our submittals to juvenile justice. That's our criminal citations and our arrests of our juveniles over the past 5 years. That's a huge decrease, and we've been trying to develop a means to capture the information where we're seeing a loss in the actual incidents that are occurring. We understand that the incidents are occurring. However, the 81% we can't actually show. We average typically around 8,000 submittals to juvenile justice prior to the MOU and the School Justice Partnership, 8,000. So if we are 81% decrease, and we're only showing around 2,700 alternatives to arrest, there's a loss in some of those incidents. So we haven't actually captured that, whether or not those incidents are just not being reported, and they're being handled through the school administrative staff, through the multi-tiered systems of supports, or our officers are not reporting it and then using their discretion to actually not even utilize the school justice partnership to actually record that. So there is a loss in the actual incidents historically with our department, and I think around 2,000 or so incidents that we're still trying to capture. So we're getting better at it. Like I said, it's the second year of really being into reporting the school justice partnership data. This year, right now, as of I think it was 2 days ago, like I said, last school year we had 2,700 alternatives to arrest, and this year we're already showing 2,125 alternatives to arrest for the 2022-2023 school year, and it's trending to possibly reach around 3,000 alternatives to arrest issued to juveniles for incidents committed in schools or focus acts, and officers are using discretion not to actually write a criminal citation or make a custodial arrest of the juvenile. The next general order, did I go back that way? Did I hit it? All right, harbor referrals. Harbor referrals came along prior to the MOU that the Clark County School District Board of Trustees signed with Juvenile Justice. When the harbor was established, I think it was a year or two before the School Justice Partnership was. The option was a great alternative for our officers. We didn't have the option of alternatives to arrest. Officers provided alternative measures for incidents that occurred in a manner that we could not track. So when the School Justice Partnership came around, we used that as a means to actually track that. The harbor was just part of that, and it added a little bit of confusion. The harbor came first, and that measure was an incident occurred, and it was a qualifying incident. It was nonviolent, just like the SJP, and SJP is a School Justice Partnership. So qualifying incidents for harbor referrals were the same as School Justice Partnership incidents. And they were nonviolent, and the officer can write a criminal citation at the time, and on the bottom of the citation, the officer would write harbor on it. So juvenile justice would then receive that citation, they would hold it in abeyance and use that to actually provide services to the juvenile. If the juvenile didn't complete the mandates of the harbor, that criminal citation for the juvenile was taken out of abeyance, and it would go through the normal process to be reviewed by a probation officer. So like I said, then the School Justice Partnership came along and kind of confused a lot of that. So now we use the harbor referrals in the manner of an online type of reporting system. So an officer can actually make a harbor referral with a mentoring or counseling, with a social worker referral, things like that. So the traditional usage of a harbor referral went away just by the means of us using our, new program of an alternative to arrest. And I think I really confused everybody with all of that I just said. I'm sorry. All right. Next we have General Order 400, arrests. General 400, it sets guidelines with respect to arrests and directs department members to exercise the power of arrest in a reasonable manner. So we naturally cover our authority under the law in 171. Use of discretion or officer discretion is highlighted in there as well. The method and manner in which we like to guide our officers when conducting interviews and interrogation guidelines. Release of detainees under the law, arrests outside of our jurisdiction. Local charges and warrants from other jurisdictions are described in there. Obstructing arrests gives details on what obstructing arrests are and what the guidelines are to follow regarding obstructing arrests. Warrant arrests are also included in there. Juvenile warrant and writ of attachment arrests. So the law doesn't really describe a juvenile warrant. So what was developed was a juvenile writ of attachment, and that is there's guidelines on actually how to complete one of those. The law basically states now that if a juvenile commits a crime, it doesn't have to be committed in the officer's presence. So the officer, when they find the child, if they have probable cause, they can either issue that citation or write make a custodial arrest. But now they also have the option of the writ of attachment. So that writ of attachment would be now sent to juvenile justice, and the process would then begin or end. Also a process for citations in lieu of arrest. So it details a lot of adult issues regarding citations in lieu of arrest. Obviously, we can't issue a citation for a gross misdemeanor or a felony for an adult, although we can for a juvenile. So it gives guidelines on types of incidents, things like that, that we can actually issue a misdemeanor criminal citation for an adult violator. And then we have some guidelines on and off-duty activity that involves arrests of subjects. That's General Order 400. General Order 450, search and seizure. That sets guidelines to work within the framework of the U.S. Constitution when conducting searches and seizures as prescribed by the Fourth Amendment. So I thought I'd talk about this prior to the actual use of force, because also conducted, since we actually work in a school environment. The New Jersey versus TLO in 1985 is discussed at length, describing the authority of school administrators and their ability to conduct reasonable or searches based on reasonable suspicion for a violation of criminal law or a school rule. So that's how the school administrators can actually conduct searches of students' backpacks, things like that, for items of school rule violation or a weapon. And that's described in General Order 450, search and seizure. General Order 650, the use of force, sets guidelines for reasonable use of force. The procedure includes, and it's based on the Graham versus Connor model, determining objective reasonableness regarding the use of force. Also covers de-escalation and recovery position, duty to intervene, things like that. We have a use of force model that describes the levels of force, all based on the subject's level of resistance. A method to document the use of force, and that in that method it describes the reportable use of force. So basically, if an officer does have to control a subject based on the subject's resistance, there are reporting requirements for that measure. And finally, we have a force investigation analysis and training team. This was started about, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Las Vegas, I think about 8 years ago. Force science is a training based on Graham versus Connor to determine reasonableness in the use of force, since it's all based on a reasonable officer on the scene and not the 20/20 hindsight after the fact. So it depends on a three-prong determination, so to speak, of the severity of the crime, the threat to the officer or others, and then resistance of the subject. And you take all of those into consideration based on the totality of the circumstances, and in those types of situations, you would determine, the level of the resistance, the subject's size, the skill level, things like that, and also as compared with the officer and their perception of what's going on at the time. That's 650. Like I said at the beginning, we have 4 years of data here. I started with the 2019-2020 school year, which was a very busy school year. This was prior to the pandemic that our schools were shut down. I think it was on March 15th or March 16th of 2020. And that year we were talking about and observing how violent and how much activity was going on in our schools at that very time. And then the pandemic hit. The 2019 and 2020 school year, number-wise, basically calls for service and incidents that our officers were responding to, was shaping up to be our busiest year in the history of our department. Had it not been for the school year ending, it would have been just by a couple weeks. And we had, I believe, months left in the school year. So then the pandemic hit, and then we were during COVID. We have 30 in that year in 2019, 2020. OC is oleoresin, and I'm going to screw this up because I can't speak this word. Oleoresin capsicum. It's the active ingredient in cayenne pepper, so it's Scoville units, and I believe it's 2 million Scoville units in the pepper spray, I guess you would call it, and that's why the term pepper spray comes along for that use. So, hot sauce has Scoville units, and I believe some do actually go up to 2 million Scoville units. Obviously, I'm not an expert on that, and I have Lieutenant Zink in Las Vegas if there's any questions regarding the use of OC. 6 taser usages, and I believe for all of these, all of our taser usages for these years were all adults. 22 open hand, that's arm bars, grabs, escorts, things like that. That number is high because we have a requirement if there is a complaint of injury or if someone says they're hurt or complains of discomfort. It's the procedure for the officer to actually report that use of force, even if a tactic wasn't even deployed during that custody situation, or even if it wasn't a custody situation. In 2021 to 2022, after COVID hit, we had a very busy year. That year actually ended up to be our busiest year in the history of our department. It started off very quickly. Typically, when students return to school after the summer months, I call it a get-to-know-you period where they get to know everybody and they get comfortable in their new environment or returning to their old environment, and things start to happen within a month or so. And activity at that point, at least criminal activity, tends to pick up after several months of being in school. That year, it happened immediately. I think the number was 1,000 fights in a month for the first 2 months, somewhere around there, and I may be wrong with that number, but we were reporting a very incredibly high number of physical altercations by multiple combatants on our campuses, and that was highly covered by the media the first couple months, and then actually at the start of the 2022 school year, there was the reported violent acts, and we got a lot of media coverage regarding the reported violent acts that had happened in the first half of that year, and that year did shape up to be our busiest year. We did notice in the first 2 months that we were having a high level of usage of pepper sprays, and I think, I don't know if it was in between around 30 to 40 just within 2 or 3 months. So we brought everybody back in. I had noticed from watching those videos of our officers that they weren't talking. I remember telling them it seemed like some of them were struck mute when they were approaching fights and things like that, and although that they believe they cannot be heard based on the situation of the screaming and yelling of maybe 100 to 200 people that they're trying to control or bring calm to, that they still need to identify themselves, issue some commands and things like that. So we brought them back in, reminded all of them of the training that they have taken, and that curbed our pepper spray or OC usage throughout the end of that school year. And I believe if we didn't do that, it would have been a lot higher. We did have a lot of adult activity on our campuses, which it's not new, but we've always had issues where adults would come in and protect their child or their nephew or their younger brother or sister from some type of incident to protect them. So we've always had that type of situations happening. The 2021-2022 school year, we had quite a lot of adult incidents where they were resolving their issues either with staff or other students in a violent manner. And that also, it contributed to our level of use of force. We had a total of 90 uses of force that year. This current school year, the 2022-2023 school year, trending-wise, I believe this was a couple months ago, we were showing a decrease in the amount of fights on campuses. So that our fights were down around 20 some odd percent. However, we were showing a 12% increase in the individual acts of violence on our campus, at 12%, and that's compared to our busiest year. So that was a large increase in the actual assault and battery incidents that were being reported on our campuses. And some of that contributed to our 38 usage of force for the 2022-2023 school year. That school year we had 8 pepper spray usages, 2 taser usages, and 28 open hand reported uses of force. And again, the 2020-2021 COVID year was not in there. But if you want to know, the number for that year is 10. Training.
Chief Black Eye?
Yes.
So we're going to get tight on time, and so I'm wondering if you could spend about 5 more minutes, and then we could move into the question portion.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can do that. Thank you. All right, training. Department records are audited by the Nevada Peace Officer Standards and Training. I believe our last audit was last calendar year. And on average, each officer receives around 40 hours of continuing education training each year. Training is in compliance with NRS 289-510. All training meets Nevada Post requirements for certification. All instructors meet Nevada Post qualifications for instructors. All new officers meet the requirements for basic training of peace officers. All new officers receive at least 4 weeks of department orientation training, followed by 14 weeks of field training with a field training officer before they are a solo officer in the field. So we have use of force training, de-escalation, crisis intervention, implicit bias, racial profiling, interacting with the mentally ill, and restorative justice is just some of the things that I wanted to discuss. I have 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through this as quickly as possible. Basically, like our policy says, our training is to cover all of those items each year. It's continuing education for officers to remind them of the Graham versus Connor reasonableness or objective reasonableness. Tennessee versus Garner, Bryan versus McPherson for the pepper spray use, prelude to using force. We go over objective reasonableness again, the totality of the circumstances regarding each situation, recovery position, officer responsibilities, and also supervisor responsibilities. Each year, officers receive training, regular training in the application of the use of reasonable force. De-escalation training, this is actually de-escalation and the reasonable use of force, that's how it's titled. This is it meets post standards. It's training our officers receive each year. The officers receive understanding de-escalation, judging when to use de-escalation techniques and applying de-escalation techniques. I've been an officer for 30 years. This is my 31st year of being a police officer in this state. My experience, I can tell you that more officers that are inexperienced are going to use more force, and that's what our numbers show. The majority of our officers that use force are 1 to 4 to 5 years on as a police officer, and they use more force than our experienced officers, and that becomes because they don't have the skills built up to actually deal with folks, to talk to them. They don't. They eventually learn communication skills, their posture, their face, learning how to read folks better. They have a different mindset as to when they get out of the academy, and the way they think through situations. They're taught ways to actually think through even violent situations, and they get better at that as they get more mature as a police officer. So the de-escalation training that was prompted by, I think, legislative helps to those younger officers to, learn some skills that the older officers have just naturally taken on after working for so many years in addressing situations in a manner to de-escalate rather than escalate. And it can be even by a stance. So this de-escalation training gives officers some tools. It's called a system to use de-escalation tactics to actually resolve incidents peacefully enough if you're able to actually do it. So that's our de-escalation training. It's through actually Police One, which is it's also approved through Nevada Post. Crisis intervention training, all of our officers, 85% of them actually, are crisis intervention training certified. We created a 40-hour class during COVID, and this summer, hopefully that 85% will be going up, where we hope to schedule a class over the summer break and get more of our officers in there. We're hoping to reach 95 to almost 100% of our officers to be CIT trained. This gives officers a better understanding of the common mental illness concerns. It improves their interactions, obviously. More knowledge gives them more tools, more awareness of what they're dealing with, and probably recognize when somebody's going through some type of mental crisis, and that's the whole point of it. They also are exposed and spend time in a mental health facility to actually observe some of the behaviors that maybe they will be experiencing out in the field. We invite community activists to come and speak and share their experiences or even their actually own issues regarding experiences with mental illness. And I'm trying to rush. Is that two? Does that have 2 minutes left? No, 5 minutes left. No. There you go. All right. All right, implicit bias training. Also mandated, however, the school district had started this training with our police department. I believe it was 2 years prior to the change in the law to include it in a 289.150, I think is the law. So all of our officers continually have received implicit bias training, or to understand that they have some unconscious biases, just like everyone does, and how that may impact the performance of their jobs. And there's methods to overcome implicit bias through that training. All right, racial profiling. Understanding the issues created. I can stop if you want to just tell me to stop, and you can go on to the question.
No, I think we want to hear this part.
Okay. It's because I'm rushing through these. All right. Understanding the racial profiling. Also, I believe that's a requirement under 289.510. Understanding the issues created in law enforcement from racial profiling. They also received training in explaining the difference between racial profiling and reasonable suspicion. Understanding liability related to racial profiling and the strategies to avoid racial profiling. And one of those is like basically considering yourself blindfolded and receiving information and just making your judgment based on that versus what you're actually seeing. So there's strategies like that. There's all sorts of things for officers to be trained on to understand better things that are possibly unconscious that they are not aware of, and how to avoid judging characteristics as indicators of criminal activity. And I think that's exactly what racial profiling is. Interacting with the mentally ill. So this is also something they get yearly. Like I said, we're trying to get 100% of our officers trained in crisis intervention training. So they also do receive each year interacting with the mentally ill. It gives them just the same basic information regarding the prevalent situations or conditions that officers may be observing out there in the field, and giving them tools to actually respond to those types of things versus considering, action immediately. So. Lastly, the restorative justice, I pretty much talked about that a lot. They get that training each year as well. We utilize juvenile justice to help us revise any updated training each year. So the officers receive that. And basically they just get continuing education training, going over, reminding them of the resources out there that are available that they can utilize when applying an alternative to arrest when they actually use discretion instead of issuing a citation or making a custodial arrest for juveniles. And that completes the presentation.
Senate.
Thank you, Dr. Jara.
Yeah, Superintendent Jar for the record. Madam Chair, members of the committee, we got a lot of work to do. We're not perfect as a school system or as a police department, but I do have confidence in our chief and our officers. I do want to also stress a couple points before I turn it over to our chair. Some of the things that we are dealing with today, it's been dealing with around urban America, that we are dealing with community issues and challenges that are coming into the footsteps of our schools. So please know that we are continuing our partnership with our city officials to work together because we can deal with 7 to 3, what happens between the school day. But a lot of these challenges, as you heard, some of the adult challenges that we are arresting adults coming onto our campuses, onto our buses, are community issues that we must deal with. And I know that our chief works with all the agencies in constant collaboration. So please know that we have a lot of work to do as a community, and we are committed to doing that to make sure that ultimately everyone is safe in our schools. So one of the things that I failed to mention is that after what we have been dealing with and seeing, we've also are starting in something that we're modeling after Metro, which is having community leaders come into our police department and have an insight onto what happens on a day-to-day basis. Obviously not daily, but we are under Chief Black Guy to make sure that we have community leaders, sort of like the MAC, which is part of what Metro in Las Vegas does. So modeling a very successful community-driven organization into our school police. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. And we're going to go to committee questions. But prior to doing that, I failed to recognize my co-chair today, Chair of Judiciary, Senator Melanie Schreibel. We did this together, and it wasn't mine alone. So thank you. Okay, committee. I'll entertain questions from the committee. Senator Flores, and then Senator Hansen.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I understand you're obviously very busy, and I also understand the community's been actively trying to engage and have conversations with you, so I appreciate the dialogue that's been happening. I'm interested to know a little bit about how the internal policies work when there's disciplinary matters within officers. So what the process looks like when somebody brings up an issue. Procedurally, how are students informed on how to bring up an issue? I am a student at XYZ school. I'm concerned about the conduct of a certain officer. How do they go about addressing that issue first, and then what happens? If you could walk us through that process, A through Z of that process. And then lastly, in that, is any of that ever public information? Is that something that's ever shared with the public when we do have an issue? This incident happened. They went through this disciplinary, I don't know, ABC. I'm assuming there may be, depending on the incident, you may say this might be the right recourse of discipline. Termination might be the right recourse here. And is that relayed and is that shared with the families, or particularly the family of the student who was involved in that incident? If you could walk us through that, please.
Okay, great, thank you. The IA process, Chief Black Eye for the record. So the IA, or Internal Affairs process, we can receive anonymous complaints in any form, fashion, or whatever. We just need to be notified. And they come through our officers, they come through staff, they come through Safe Voice. So students have complained through Safe Voice, and that's where we receive some of our complaints. So if they do have issues, they can do that. They can talk to an officer, any officer. So any agency would refer a complaint back to our office. I would I or one of the other executive staff will receive a notification of that and will be referred to internal affairs to investigate or do a preliminary investigation based on the information from the complainant. And that information can be written up in the form of a complaint describing the actions or what have you. If there's body-worn camera or CAD, CAD meaning computer-aided dispatch, maybe there's a report, a citation, or something like that that may be coming along with that. All of those would be gathered together in a preliminary investigation through internal affairs and then handed over to the captain responsible for that division. I have 4 captains. We break the district up into 3 regions. So I have a captain over each region, and my 4th captain is over the administrative division. So my captains handle those complaints. They would make their determination on what they want to do. There's 2 ways a complaint can be handled based on the severity of the allegation. It could be handled through division investigation, which we described a low-level type of discipline could result from the allegation. So, for instance, it could be somebody was rude or reported to be rude. We would consider that some low-level type of disciplinary measure, maybe a written reprimand, but there's also progressive discipline. So if that officer's record shows that he or she may have other discipline for the same type of ladder, I guess, then that ladder would go up. So there's 2 measures. It would go off on either the division investigation, which then the division through a lieutenant or a sergeant would actually handle, or it could be requested to be handled through internal affairs. So then I would review it based on I would review the captain's recommendation, and I would either agree with that captain that it would go to a division investigation or internal affairs, or I would change it. So sometimes they would want it to go back to them as a division investigation. I say, no, it needs to go back to, internal affairs investigation, and internal affairs handles it while they coordinate and receive updates from internal affairs, and then eventually makes the ultimate decision for discipline at the end of the case. Once the decision to actually where to send that complaint, either through a division investigation or internal affairs, the interviews are set. So a formal interview, if one hasn't already been done, with the complainant, if there is one. The majority of our complaints, I believe, are internal. So the actual interview is basically from it's originated from the chain of command. It's not necessarily a citizen actually making those complaints on our officers. It's our own department complaining, and then routing that investigation in the appropriate manner. So an investigator would then investigate that internal affairs complaint. There'd be interviews scheduled with attorneys and things like that. And that takes a little while. We do utilize other agencies, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, to actually assist. Also, our internal affairs investigators are trained, and they also do some training with Metro. And we also use them to bounce off things, because we are a medium-sized department. However, we're not huge, so we don't have a lot of things happening all the time. So they use those folks for assistance in completing some of the unique investigations, I would say. Once those are done, the captain would then receive the completed or almost complete investigation. They would review it. If the captain felt there needed to be more done, the captain would return that back to the investigator, and the investigator would then follow up on whatever the captain thought may need to be looked at further. We then employ a discipline review committee made of executive staff members who aren't involved or supervising the subject. So those executive staff members of lieutenants and captains from other divisions gather together and receive the investigative report and the findings of sustained allegations of misconduct, and they would make their recommendation based off of what they learned from the investigative report and asking questions, reviewing evidence, and things like that. We have an attorney that's actually involved in that process to give them advice on what they believe or help them with the appropriate measure for discipline. That's given back to the appropriate captain. That captain would then take that recommendation from the Discipline Review Committee and then make his own or her own determination on what discipline is appropriate for that level of, I guess you'd say, misconduct. We do have a matrix that describes a level. So if you consider conduct unbecoming, and I believe that's a 1 through 7, 7 being the highest, which would be termination, 1 being very low, could be an oral warning or a written oral warning, things like that, all the way through written reprimand or suspension. Once that's completed, there's a Loudermill hearing. So the officer is then contacted, the representative for the officer is then contacted, and then when so many days after the notification, they do have that Loudermill hearing where the officer has the opportunity to respond to the chief or the captain regarding the incident, and to speak frankly with the entity, I guess, that is in charge of the discipline, and then so they can be heard. And that's the Loudermill meeting. After the Loudermill meeting, some of the discipline may change. It may stay the same. After that, there's a discipline is either issued. It's issued. It's issued after the Loudermill hearing. Then you have a step 2, which is a grievance. And then it goes to I'm probably missing a step, and then it goes to arbitration after that, typically.
Thank you, Chief. I'm going to ask members of the committee if you can give really very direct, narrow questions. They have a timeline in Las Vegas, but we don't here. And unless we want to be here all night answering questions, we need to be a little more concise, and I'm asking for everyone's help in that. So, Senator Hansen.
Kind of ironic you said that just before my question, Chair. The reality is, I wouldn't mind being here till midnight because this is a very serious thing. You guys are basically being accused of some pretty serious stuff. You know, we had a shooting at Sparks Middle School, my alma mater, where we had a teacher killed. Now, just so you know, the chief of police for Washoe County School District is Jason Trevino. He and I share a granddaughter, okay? So I was there during that incident, and I know you guys got put under, they did, I should say, the school police, put under a microscope for being not aggressive enough. So I would love you guys, too, to also have an opportunity to have everything's caught on videos nowadays, and I'll bet you could produce 10 phenomenal videos to show the situations your officers are often placed in. Now, having said that, the question is staffing. Where are you guys as far as what is your full staffing capacity for the police department, for the school district? How many do you have now? And then for Superintendent Jara, the question I have, how many teachers are you down right now? And the reason I'm bringing that up is I know there's a major problem with recruitment in both the law enforcement community and in the teacher community because of public safety and fear of danger in the classrooms for the teachers. And for you guys, low morale based on always getting beat up every time an officer screws up. So if you could address that, I would appreciate it.
Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah, I know Jason as well. Sorry, Chief Blackeye, Clark County School Police Department. Staffing, we have 188, I believe, FTEs. We have 25 dispatchers. We will be having at least 12 coordinators of emergency management, a director over that, and a school safety specialist under our umbrella. I have clerical staff and such. However, the FTEs for school police, my sworn staff, I believe, is 188. I was 100% staffed in January. I received a COPS grant that added 6 to it. I promoted 3 sergeants that added 3 other vacancies as officers. So immediately after January, I was thinking, wow, I'm under this crisis. I'm fully staffed in January. Now I'm at least 9 to 12 officer short, but 6 of those are from a grant. With 188 over 360 sites, we have just enough, I guess you'd say, but it's never going to be enough if we have an incident that is going to be tragic. So what is the right amount of officers? I use 2 officers at each comprehensive high school. However, I do have technical high schools that aren't covered. I have specialty schools that aren't covered either. Hardly any of them my middle schools. I think I have 60 or 70 middle schools that do not have an officer. Some of them do. In elementary schools, I think there's 210, 217, or 220 elementary schools that do not have officers either. So I use a patrol force of about 38, 39 patrol officers. There's also 12, I believe, sergeants out in the field. I have specialty sergeants over traffic, canine units, things like that. So it's a chore each and every day, and to get overwhelmed is easy, but it's our environment. I would like more officers. I've tried to get more officers. There was money that was available. I believe we were slotted for 33 officers through legislative acts. I think it was 4 or 5 years ago. That money went away, I believe, over COVID, and we were left with the 20 officers that we had hired through that funding that the district then had to absorb the cost of that. So I don't know if that answers the question. Low morale. If we're 100% staffed in January, the morale, I believe, was wonderful in January. But you're right. There is it's difficult. It's high criticism, a lot of scrutiny, and it's needed. That is needed, but it has to be fair.
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Madam Chair, Senator Hanson, great question. So I'm going to tell you our current vacancy is over 1,400 educators. And I'll also tell you that if you recall in 2017, the legislature passed AB 469, which really limits the superintendent position control. And what has transpired, I have 700 licensed educators that are out of classrooms, not in the classroom. And I say that because what's happened is that out in the outer ring of what I call on the outer ring of Las Vegas in the suburbs, we have seen an increase of teachers, but where we have our tougher areas in our urban core is where we have our vacancies and our challenge of educators going into some of those schools. And that is something that we are trying to deal with and really making sure that, is that we have educators in the greatest need for our children to have the greatest need, which is something that I have no control over. Because of AB 469.
One final thought, and that is, you can't prove a negative. I don't know how many thousands or tens of thousands of acts of violence your presence has prevented. So I just want to salute you guys, the great job you do, in spite of occasionally some terrible mistakes. But I think when we look at this in the big picture, I'm very grateful for service officers like yourself who are willing to serve in circumstances that frankly are often horrendously bad and getting virtually no thank yous for the great jobs you do, but all sorts of criticism when you occasionally have a screw up. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Harris and then Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll make my questions so direct that they'll just be statements. So I heard a lot about your policies. I did not hear the term student once. The court cases that you train on all involved adults and their decision-making capacity, not children at school. We've got to treat children a bit differently. I think your policies could equally be Metro's policy. And I believe that that's a problem. I don't see where we've taken into account that you all are dealing with children at a school environment. Whoever suggested this blindfold method to address racial profiling should probably be substituted in with someone else. I don't know where those strategies are coming from, but I hope they're not strategies that you all are coming up with on your own and are actually contracting with professionals who deal with this, because that blindfold strategy, that colorblind strategy, it doesn't work. Pick something else, please. Officers seem to be more comfortable using force than other techniques. Officers, in my opinion, should either be equally trained on the ability to talk and deal with students as they are in force. It seems to me we should only be allowing the more experienced officers to use force on our children, not the less experienced ones. Hope you would be willing to address that. And then lastly, I heard that being rude to students is kind of a low-level offense. Please consider upping that as I mentioned before, these are children in their school environment, and they're dealing probably with other students being rude to them or bad grades. They don't need officers being rude to them as well when they're there to protect them. That should be a more serious offense, in my opinion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think Senator Harris must be like in my mind because one of my first thoughts were when you said that you had adopted Henderson's policy, the first thing I thought about was their children, and that should be nuanced. And accepting a policy from a police agency that, and then taking it into a school environment and not doing any kind of adaptation, it's probably problematic, right? But my questions are more to a couple of questions on citations issued to children. How common is it to issue a citation to a child without a parent being present and then divert it to the harbor? And then I have another.
Okay, thank you, Mike Blackeye, for the record. That would cause me to guess. So how common is it that an officer would issue a citation without the presence of an adult or their parent for traffic-related offenses? If a student is
No, inside of the school for a fight.
okay, so as a misdemeanor offense, typically how they work out is the officer would make contact with the subject. The school would actually contact the officer to say, hey, there's a fight. The officer would then respond, help bring resolve or calmness to whatever situation's going on because of the fight. So, fighters would be separated if that's possible without having, if it's a typical fight, maybe it's two people, right? So a fight's probably not going to result in an issue of a citation unless it's a battery. So if a subject went up to another subject and then just struck that subject without any resistance of the other subject, then we have a case of battery. So that's where a citation would be probably issued to one of the juveniles for battery. I don't really think we issue citations for mutual affray or disturbance of school. Those are classified as typically going to be a focus act, and they're resolved either through school administration, through other means. That's like an alternative to arrest. But the battery, the process is that the officer can issue the citation to the student, depending upon the age. The student can sign that citation. The officer, but is also required as soon as possible to contact the parent or have the parent contacted. So if those things aren't being done, I'd like to hear that, because that is not a proper practice. It's the practice in 420 is to actually contact the parent as soon as practicable. And that could be done even before the issuance of a citation, and the parent can actually help sign the citation with the juvenile. But sometimes that's not done, so I'd have to guess. I don't know.
So I appreciate that response because it has happened, right? And I want to dovetail the statement that I'm getting ready to make. When we talk about we want to prevent the prison pipeline, it's my understanding that when the citation is issued, that also turns into a juvenile record for that child. And I know that there was, and we're not supposed to get into, I guess, investigations or ongoing investigations, but I'll have that parent follow up. But there is a record that is being created, and in this instance, it was an 11-year-old who was asked to sign a citation without their parent being present. And the funny part about the story is that the parent happened to be a Metro police officer who then challenged that signing, right? For several reasons. And so I think that's something we need to further examine. But the thing that I want to also touch on, you spoke about really briefly Miranda, right, within the school environments. And then I don't know if it was the 2005 case that you cited, but the first thing that popped in my mind was when you do a Miranda, when you do an interrogation of a child, it is nuanced. And I'm wondering because there was a 2011 case, Supreme Court case, it was JDB versus North Carolina. And they made the ruling that said, does the age of the child matter? And it said, yes, if the officer is aware of the age of the child when he starts to question or give Miranda. And so, because the issue of clarity and understanding what you're telling them is a very poignant point, and it is very explicit within a school environment. And so I want to know more about, or if you have any information on how the interrogation or custody or Miranda is actually administered when you're dealing with an elementary child, when you're dealing with a middle school child. I mean, because there for a fact that the environment is telling you the age of the student.
Thank you. Good question. About that, we do have a specific procedure that is not listed in 420. I don't know where it went. It covers incidents involving elementary age students and those with diminished mental capacity. So that does apply for elementary school age children. And if someone in the Las Vegas area can speak better onto that, that would be helpful. The 11-year-old at the time, I wish if there was a complaint that could be made, our policy specifically says 12 years old can be cited, and that started years ago with the habitual truancy. At the time was a misdemeanor, and that was the practice for juveniles 12 years of age or older to be able to sign a truancy citation. So that's where we get the 12-year-old. We know that the 14-year-old law basically states that they're of sound mind unless infected with insanity. So we understand that 14 years old, it's the law in the state says that these children are of sound mind. Between 10 and 14, they can commit a criminal offense if at the time they knew its wrongfulness, and they can be shown that the child at the time was aware that it was a crime they're actually committing. And I know it's difficult because of the 10-year-old. Prior to that change, it was 8 years old. But I don't remember when that 10-year-old change came. So does anybody from Las Vegas have that answer on the elementary school age or diminished mental capacity?
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Blackeye, and thank you, Senators, for this opportunity to engage in colloquy of this very important topic. So Miranda
Please identify
is
yourself,
the
sir.
most...
Sir, please
My
identify yourself.
apologies. John Mayer. I am a sergeant with the School District Police Department and one of the policy managers. So Miranda is the most cited case in all the Supreme Courts. And you bring up JDB versus North Carolina in 2011, identifying that we have to consider age when discussing Miranda. When I teach legal aspects to all of our new hires, and I go over JDB, and I also go over a case called Michael Fair, which is, I believe, in 1979. And the Supreme Court stated at the age of 16 in that one that the student knew what Miranda meant. And in JDB, they say 13-year-olds, you have to take age of consideration. And we identify Nevada Revised Statute 193 and in 194 of knowing wrongfulness and of sound mind at the age of 14. When I took over policy management position a couple years ago, I introduced making it to be at least 12 years of age anytime we're going to interview a student. Do I believe personally that we should up it to the age of 14? Personally, I do. But the state law says at the age of 10 is when a child commit a criminal act. So right now we're leaving it at the age of 12. I do believe 2 years ago in the last session that they wanted to introduce the age of 16, and that did fail. But we did reintroduce a new juvenile Miranda per state law, which we now do every time for any student under the age of 18. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. So my final question, and I'm going to try to weave in 2 points to this. So what's going on over at Peterson Behavioral, is a problem, and I don't know how this particular school is being engaged. I know there was a massive brawl. What is it now? 3 weeks. Gang fight. Metro came on site. CCSD police was the last to show up. Or you were the latest in time. I'll say that. But the school in and of itself has no proper supervision going on. There are no licensed teachers there. The children are sitting in the lunchroom all day, sitting on tables. There are, I won't say they're allegations because there are people saying that, you know, there's vaping, there are other things going on campus that it said it was might as well be Eastside High replayed at Peterson. Not the same as Cowan, of what you have going on, and that the re-engagement plan is not happening, which is in play. And so I want to talk about that because there's safety risk on all sides. Safety risk for the students, safety risk for the teachers that are going on there. And the fact that there's no education happening at all. And then we're talking about we want to prevent the prison pipeline. But we are feeding and festering an environment where students, whether it be a 1 fight, 2 fight, 3 fights, are finding themselves in a situation where it is harvesting behavior and not changing behavior at any point. A school is not a prison. It was never set up to be one. And it's never been set up to be a place where they go unsupervised because they were expelled or suspended, and then more havoc is being created in a school environment with no responsibility or accountability. And so I want to know what's happening.
Superintendent Jar, for the record, it's a great question, Senator Neal. And I can tell you, I think it goes back to what Senator Hansen mentioned about the morale and the choice. And I'll say that. But I'll take a little bit about what I heard the Secretary of Education mention on Monday, that it's not a teacher shortage. We are at a doorstep of a teacher shortage, but we're also at a teacher respect issue, of the respect of our hardworking educators. And I think that's a piece. But I, as far as the individual incident in school, I don't want to comment on that because that really highlighting one case, but I can tell you holistically in the urban core of Las Vegas, it is a challenge, and we tried to incentivize educators to go there. That fell flat because of different things. But I can tell you is where I have no position control. I cannot transfer educators to go to certain schools or other schools as my urban colleagues can because of AB 469. That is the reality. There is a teacher's choice and selection. You have schools that can lower class size versus where you have gaps. And one of your other schools in the urban core, I am extremely concerned that in one of our smaller elementary schools that we're working together on has 8 licensed educators, the rest are subs. That is a huge problem that I'm dealing with, and I have a hard time. And that is, there is very limited possibility for me as a superintendent to transfer or place educators in certain schools where I have huge gaps.
Senator Neal, follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand what's going on, but are you saying that the status of what's going on over there is going to remain the way that it is? Because
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Senator Neal, I am just as concerned as you are. There is very limited, I cannot place teachers into those schools. I don't have the ability because of a law that was passed by this legislature in 2017. It's called AB 469. I cannot place teachers there. I would love to.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to release the mic. I was on 469 for 2 years, and I don't know if I would call it suffering or whatever I want to call it, but I sat on that committee for that law, watched the reorganization law be revamped in 2017. And I'm trying to like process in my mind, like we took away Central's power to do certain things, but this is a safety concern. And if you're trying to tell me that 469 stripped away your power to manage safety, I would disagree and I would argue.
Okay, we're going to move on to Senator Donate, then Senator Titus.
Thank you so much, Chair. You know, in talking about, I think there's a power to how we started this presentation today. And for me, you know, I'm very concerned with the ways that folks in our schools are operating, not just in the video that was shown, but just the reality of what our students have to go through. And in many conversations that I've had, you know, I haven't graduated less than 10 years ago, so I still recall a lot of the situations that I went through, and of course that my siblings have gone through as well. And, you know, in speaking with stories, there have been situations where students have been pepper sprayed as being bystanders of fights. They themselves were not involved in the encounter, but because of the use of escalation, that is simply the outcomes that our students have faced. Whether or not they should have existed and where that falls into the use of force diagram, that's to be debated. The fact of the matter is, there's obviously what we have seen with my colleagues and with the schools that we represent. There is an idea that perhaps there is a school to prison pipeline. That is something that many students have reiterated over and over again. And I would implore you, as you are seeking to revise your use of force policy, that it's not just done internally. Because when we talk about Miranda rights or the interrogation of students, if you yourself are making those policy decisions as part of the revision without consulting the community first, that's going to be a failure of policy, and we're going to be back here in just a few years. And this may be, before I ask my question, which I'll try to make as simple as possible, maybe this is a controversial opinion from myself, but I come from the perspective that if students are fighting, rather than giving them a citation or arresting them, maybe we should provide them with the mental health support services that they need. Plain and simple. And throughout my time in the legislature so far, you know, we've talked about the resources for mental health support services. And I wish that we could provide us as to what the gaps are of how many faculty we need to hire for counselors, etc. Because then we can quantify what that finite number could be. So the two questions that I have is, number one, have any CCSD police officers ever been disciplined for using pepper spray over the last 3 years? And then my separate question after that is, how many Clark County School District police officers have ever been disciplined for the use of force over the last 3 years? And if you can divide that for me, the second one particularly, whether those police officers were suspended or terminated, I think that's probably helpful, at least for the committee.
Mike Black, for the record, Clark County School District Police Department. The second question was, within the last 3 years, how many officers were disciplined or investigated for excessive use of force? And then the first part was officers being disciplined over the last 3 years for pepper spray usages. I'd have to get the pepper spray usages. I'd have a guess for the allegations of excessive force over the last 3 years. Just on top of my head, I don't know if you want that type of number or you would rather get it as a follow-up.
You can do both.
Okay, top of my head, maybe neighborhood of 5.
And Chair, just for clarification, so that is 5 that you have investigated for use of force?
My guess is that would be 5 for excessive use of force.
And do you know from the top of your head if any of them have been terminated, or were most of them resulting in suspension, or is that's just a number for investigation?
That's the number for investigation. The outcome of the investigation is not public information to share. And if it's appropriate, Chair, can I use the take a break to use the restroom?
Sure, go ahead.
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Senator, we can get that other information for you.
We're going to take a 2-minute recess. I'll call the meeting back to order. Okay, so my next question comes from Senator Titus.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first and foremost, I want to thank you, Superintendent and Chief Blackeye, for being here. I appreciate it, and I appreciate all of the support that you brought, your members of your team and other officers that have to put potentially their lives and other lives out at risk on a daily basis, youth or not. It is a stressful job, so thank you for being here. Just so you know, my background, rural family, medical doctor, rural community, but I'm married to a law enforcement officer, 35 years, 2 terms as sheriff of Lyon County. So I have a lot of respect for what you do and what you've put yourselves through and your families through. Having said that, however, there are protections that you, being a police officer on a campus with youth is different than being out with in the general public, and there are certain training programs and mental health issues and ways to approach that you should know. It's not the same. Risks can be there and risks can be the same. one thing that we did pass in this legislative body is, and that's something that my husband enforced in Lyon County as sheriff before it became law, was body cameras. Do you have body cameras that your officers wear?
Mike Blackeye, for the record, yes. I believe we started our program several years before it was required.
Good. So all of your officers currently, when they are out interacting with youth on duty, are wearing a body camera?
Yes.
Thank you. And finally, my question to you is, how can we help you? How can we, it's easy for us to come and judge you, but my question to you is, how can we help you do your job better? Because I see your job as I'm hearing more and more complaints about violence. I have grandkids in the Clark County School District. I have a granddaughter that was attacked by somebody standing in a lunch line. She was attacked in the lunch line by a fellow student. The student who attacked her was back in school the next day. I have teachers that I know that were attacked. So it's not just the police officers taking down a student at any one time and you are horrible people. That's not how this works. There's a lot of components in this discussion. So I'm concerned about you and your officers, but I'm also concerned about the students, and I'm concerned about the teachers. You are in the thick of it. What are we missing? Where can we help? We know mental health is huge, but if you had everything you could do and we would offer to you the solutions, what would be your solution?
Well, that's a huge question. I guess I have two-part answer.
Chief.
Oh, Chief Blackeye, Clark County School District Police Department. Sorry about that. The first is it's kind of related, but not necessarily. Through my experience, I think it would be helpful if, and I don't know if it's even possible, but I think it would be, if there was, I know we have law enforcement task force for pretty much everything, vice, gangs, things like that. Why not have a task force for internal affairs processes, for the handling of complaints of misconduct or allegations of misconduct for officers that would be handled by an agency, not an agency, but a task force. So, for instance, Southern Nevada agencies could create or develop an MOU. They could supply officers to that or their own investigators based on the size of their department or whatever, resources. And then that agency or that task force would then be the ones investigating all allegations, regardless of the agency, of officer misconduct. What I found through this whole process since February 9th is there's a lot of, there's a lot involved with it that I'm not experienced with it. In my 30 years, I haven't been experienced with this level of, pressure from certain organizations in the community, from political type of pressure, I guess you'd say, or knowing that it's actually out there, and that does not help the investigative process whatsoever. So if there was some type of support for that type of, and it doesn't have to be an investigative task force that's consistently together and working on everything that goes on, because quite frankly there are a lot of complaints that come in that are investigated all the time, and the majority of those are found to be or either exonerated or just unfounded in the basis of the allegation. But something like that could be enacted or when a complaint or an allegation reaches a certain level. And that's number one. Number two, I'm not used to, I'm a cop. I've been a cop for a long time. I'm not used to being asked the question about how can we help you? Really not. Never been, never, it's really not thrown out at us. It's never really a question of, hey, how can we help you? I didn't get that. So I really don't have an answer, because it's you throw me off when someone asks, hey, how can we help you? Because it's not necessarily about that. People only want to talk to us when they have an issue or a concern, and it's typically not positive. And so when we get a positive, truly positive type of question, it's very difficult. But I do have some suggestions. I'd like, and we're working towards it. So the things that I think need to be improved with safety in our schools are things that we're actually already working on, but they're difficult because of funding, because of staffing, things like that. I'd like our physical security measures to be well-funded, staffed, so they can actually have a standardized type of approach to having standard physical security measures at each and every site. I think physical security is paramount when it comes to our facilities and how they're built, in access to them, in even staffing, down to the cameras, down to the alarms, down to alerts, things like that. I don't think, well, in Las Vegas, I know we have schools, we have the alert buttons, we have all different types of things where we go out, and I've spent most of my life out in rurals. I know that doesn't exist in a lot of the school districts because of possible funding or what have you. So I think that could help the entire educational system in Nevada if physical security measures became a priority and funded to help secure our schools better, because it's not all people, even though schools are people. They're building too, and they're in those buildings, and we need to have measures in place to actually protect things from happening.
And
Would that include like a single point of entry?
Single point of entry, things that we're doing, and my boss can talk a little bit about that.
so, Superintendent Jara, for the record, and thank you, Chief Black Guy, for that comment. I think Senator Titus, and I love that it's not just the Clark County. I think it's my colleagues across the state are facing the same challenges. But it's always, we are reacting to a crisis. And after we had an issue at one of our schools last spring, we immediately reallocated dollars within the Clark County School District and have budgeted $85 million for physical single point of entry, fencing to secure our children, put cameras, the instant alert, but that's not enough to get to our 366 schools. So I think that is one of the things that is an important measure for all schools, not only in the Clark County School District, but across the entire state for all my colleagues. I think that's one. And if I can piggyback in the collaboration that we're having with our municipalities, we are facing, and I've heard it here, with some of your colleagues, some of the members of this body in both of these committees. We're dealing with adult issues with children that are coming on campus from the community. So that is got to be an entire community wraparound for our children. So I think the more that we can collaborate, I mean, I'd hate to say legislate more task force, but I think that's something that I'm working on locally to find ways that we can help our young people come to school and feel safe.
Just a final comment. I'll make it brief. So, Chief Black, I apologize to you that I'm the first person who ever asked you how we could help you. So that has to change. And finally, when you have a chance to actually think about other things, because I know that I'm surprised that was a shocking question to you, I would love to hear from you. I'd love to hear some more thoughts when you have a chance. There's always that moment, I should have said that, when you get out of a situation of stress, and you'll come up with it on the plane ride home or however you're getting home. So I would love to hear more suggestions about how we can help. We know mental health crisis is, and I think everybody here feels that the state does not do enough for our youth, especially mental health for our youth. And I think that's a common thing. We may all be different here, but I think we all would agree on that. So, but happy to hear more when you do have a chance to think more ideas inside of how we can help. And thank you for being here today. And Madam Chair, thanks for the question.
Thank you. I'll go to Senator Nguyen and then Senator Schreibel.
Thank you. I was listening to some of the earlier conversations about having different policies for our school police officers as they deal with children. And I'm wondering, and I think I know the answer because it doesn't sound like we've ever developed or you've ever developed any policies. I'm curious, we look at some of our other law enforcement members and partners that are here in this room here today. And I know that within their own agencies, like I'm looking at Metro over there, I know that Metro within their own agency have come up with their own use of force policies. They've come up with their own evidence-based like processes for dealing with the community that they are policing. Obviously, the community that we are policing within our schools, within our children, when we're talking about 10, 12, 11-year-olds, even 14-year-olds, we're talking about a very different group of people. And so I'm wondering what kind of process has been put in place to do that. I mean, most of the other law enforcement agencies don't wait for us to legislate that change. And in fact, a lot of times we look at what has been done by like some of the larger agencies, and then we mandate them for like statewide use. Like when I think of use of force policies, a lot of that came from some of our larger jurisdictions and what they were doing there and what they were doing successfully. And then we wanted to replicate that across the state. So I'm a little disappointed that we haven't had that kind of conversation, or maybe you can tell me you have had those conversations, because I can't imagine that school policing there isn't evidence-based like practices out there that we should be incorporating in all of our policies, whether it's use of force, discipline, all of that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering if you've started that process, if that is something that you are waiting for all of us to make you do, or kind of where that is in the...
Okay, Mike Blackeye, Chief of Clark County School District Police Department. 420 does describe the alternatives to arrest. It's the SJP. We're the only agency that does that. So that is specifically for handling juvenile incidents. 420 also does address, and Sergeant Mayer can step in and discuss that a little bit more if he has some additional information regarding the uniqueness of that general order. Also, I talked at the beginning about the 4 weeks or 5 weeks of instruction after a police academy, because in a police academy they're not receiving information directly with dealing with juveniles. That's our time to actually instruct our officers on the environment they're going to be working in. And that 14 weeks following that is specific on-the-job training in our schools with our officers, with students, with staff, with parents, and with community involved in our schools.
Oh, can I ask what that training is based on? Like, is there like a standard across the country with respect to schools and children?
The field training?
This additional 5 weeks of training that you said that takes place after the police academy that's unique to school police officers.
Right.
What is that training based on?
The training is based on our function of our department. The officers receive instruction on writing reports, on the makeup of a school, the working with staff.
So, sorry to interrupt you, but
Sure.
I just want to get to the point. Is there any kind of, are we looking at, I understand that writing reports is important, and I understand that documenting things is important, but what kind of training are you getting dealing with a large percentage of the population? I think at one point I read that, 12.35% of CCSD students are on an IEP and have some sort of disability. Like, what kind of additional training do you deal with, encounters, disciplinary, like encounters your officers deal with dealing with children with disabilities that are children in a school setting and you're trying to discipline? Is it the same kind of training that a Metro officer would get, out on the streets with adults, or dealing with people on the strip that are behaving, improperly? So what kind of specialized training do you get, and what kind of evidence-based training and learning and policy making goes into that policy that is specific to the unique nature of working with children?
Thank you. Mike Blackeye, for the record. Lance Picone in Las Vegas is our CIT coordinator. Is he there?
Lance Picone for the record. So as far as reading an IEP, officers don't have that as training. That doesn't really affect the officer's interaction. However, they do get training. One of the classes we do have during our CIT is autism and law enforcement. Kids that do have disabilities, it gives them a way to identify and help them respond in situations where they're not dealing with a kid which may be intellectually deficient or be less likely to understand what's going on in the situation. Thank you.
So I understand that our children aren't wearing like their disability on like, on their, person. So you might not know that. I'm just curious on what kind of training goes in identifying some of the developmental and biological like deficiencies that our children have just naturally as a part of growing up. I would just like to see, I can't imagine that is a new form of training for law enforcement officers, that there are specialized things that would go into working with children in protecting them. And I would hope that any of that policy making would also take into consideration the data that I'm sure that you collect about how many people are disciplined, how many children are suspended, how many are suspended with instruction, how many are in school suspension, how many people, what percentage of the population, does that, is it disproportionate amongst like different racial and ethnic groups? And I'm sure you keep that information. You're nodding your head, Superintendent Jara. So if you could confirm that you have that data, I would hope that that evidence-based data would go into any policy making that you would consider in the future.
Thank you, Senator Scheibel.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to back up a little bit and get kind of a better understanding of how we got here and why we brought you in to talk about CCSD Police Department's policies more generally. So, Chief Blackeye, you are the chief of the CCSD Police, right?
Chief Blackeye, yes.
Okay. And how long have you been chief of police?
It was February 17th of last year.
February 17th of last year. And how long have you been with CCSD Police?
2003.
So you've been doing this for like 20 years.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You must believe in the work that you do.
Yes.
And you serve a purpose on campuses, right?
Yes.
What is that purpose?
Just like our mission states, to provide a safe and secure learning environment conducive to education.
Provide a safe and secure learning environment conducive to education?
I believe that's what it says. But however, I think there was an edit years ago that it might not capture that exactly. But the safe and secure learning environment is actually it. I don't have it in front of me.
Okay. And so are safety and security two different things to you?
Pardon?
Are safety and security two different things to you?
I didn't say security. I said secure. Safe and secure.
Okay.
If we're talking about the mission, is that what the question is?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, safe and secure learning environment.
Okay. And it's supposed to be conducive to education?
Conducive to education, I think it
Okay.
says.
So I think we have some members of the police department in Las Vegas, right? And,
yes.
And I would like them to weigh in if any of them see their purpose as being something else or something in addition when you're on campus at a Clark County school.
Well, obviously, I believe it's more than just being a peace officer on a campus. It's also interacting, building relationships, working with the staff as a team to actually help, the environment at the school function like it should. The presence of an officer helps to do that.
How does the presence of an officer help improve the environment of a school?
I believe that people feel safe when they have an officer present.
And why should they feel safer when an officer is present?
Well, if you take the incident that just occurred today in Denver, where two staff members were conducting an administrative search of a student suspected of a firearm, and that student took that firearm and shot both of those students. are both of those staff members of the school. I believe if a police officer was there present assisting in that administrative search, that incident may not have occurred. So I believe things like that make folks feel safe if the police officer is there. And just like Senator Hansen stated earlier, it's very difficult, almost impossible to gauge that the presence of a police officer prevented anything just by the mere presence, because how do you actually gauge that?
So is confiscating firearms something that Clark County police officers do?
This year, we've confiscated 27 firearms on campus property.
And how many of them were being carried by students?
I don't have that number. I believe it would be the majority of those would be carried by or brought onto campus by juveniles.
Okay. And have you ever asked CCSD students if they feel safer with police officers on campus?
The students, I believe, are surveyed each year, and correct me if I'm wrong, boss, regarding their feeling of safety on campuses with police officers. I don't know if it's each year or...
We do Superintendent Jar, for the record, we do a survey annually, but I don't have that data or the question in front of me, but we can get that to you.
Where does that data go?
It comes to my office. It gets, if it's the same survey, it gets reported to my board annually.
Is it publicly available?
Absolutely.
Okay. And I would assume that it's important to you to review this survey. And do students generally feel safer with police on campus or not?
Yes, that would be important to know.
So what is the answer?
Please make sure you state your names before
Oh,
you speak.
sorry, Mike Blackeye, Chief Clark County Schools Police Department. I don't know. I don't know what that answer is. I don't remember the last percentage that was given. I thought it was high. It was related to safety. I don't believe there was a question, and if we look back, maybe there was, specifically about if you feel safer with a school police officer on campus or not. Maybe that is something that needs to be asked.
So you send out the survey, you get back the answers, and you either don't analyze them or don't remember them.
Superintendent Jar, for the record, to say that we don't analyze that, I don't think that's a representing of the work we do as an organization. We do review it, and we give it to my executives to review within their central teams to look and see always how to make improvements. Absolutely, we do that. So,
Okay.
It's a great question.
And based on those surveys of students, how has CCSD police changed and improved their policies?
Like I said, I don't believe, sorry, Mike Blackeye, Chief Clark County Schools Police Department, I don't believe there was a question directly related to feeling safe because of a police officer.
My question's not related to directly feeling safer because of a police officer, but after you survey the students and you get the feedback, how has that feedback helped improve the Clark County School District Police Department?
I don't believe it's from the survey, however. I believe the deterioration of students and their interactions with officers has been over the years after DARE ended. So my goal has been to get officers into schools to, teach, problem solving with students. So we have a Rocket Rules program that we teach kindergartners, first grades, I believe. And it's a half-hour program with a virtual dog. So our officers there teaching children the simple things like crossing the street or dialing 911. We also are teaching LEADS, Law Enforcement Against Drugs. So we are in our schools doing that program as well with middle schools. Since we don't have that contact with our middle school students, our officers are in a number of our middle schools teaching the LEAD program to build those relationships, because I think that's what's been lost over the years. Is just our officers not being in those elementary and middle school campuses on a regular basis to actually make them feel. I don't know, it's hard to make somebody feel anything based on your presence, but that's why it's difficult to answer. it's just my belief that if we are teaching our kids better ways to solve their problems than violence, I believe they will look at us more of not just a threat or just someone that's going to be there when things are negative, but also be there when things are positive and be part of the school environment and not just an element that somebody looks at as a threat or being there as a negative element of their school day. So I'm sorry. I hope that answers some of it. I don't, it's difficult to answer that question because I don't understand most of it.
Okay, we are going to take a 1-minute break. I've just been notified that we have to change rooms in Las Vegas. So in Las Vegas, you're going to be going to another room to get on the video in that room. So this current room can be used for government affairs. So we'll take a 1-minute break. The room is 4406. 4406. We're staying right here. Okay, as soon as Chief Black Eye gets back in here, we're ready to go.
You've been watching breaking news from the Las Vegas Review Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino. You've been watching breaking news from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, sponsored by Michael Gaughan's South Point Hotel, Casino, and Spa.